relative to children with autism. And it's going to feature some puppets actually made by the Jim Henson Muppet folks who designed some puppets specifically for us. And it's going to significantly add to the science base on puppetry in autism, which at the moment is non-existent. So we're going to all of a sudden see some science in charge of it, or behind it. So this morning, we're delighted to welcome Gary Marison, who has been for 20 years now a leader in the field of autism and the law. I think he founded the first law firm in the country that was dedicated to representing individuals with autism and their families. And since then, he's represented something like 1,200 families in 35 or so states. I think that's right, Gary?
That's right.
Something like that. A fairly large number. He's also responsible for the first autism case that went to the US Supreme Court. He's the author of 2 books, one of which is Autism's Declaration of Independence, which is now available on Amazon, and also from the publisher. The website for the publisher is differlearnnospace.com. And Gary, it is all yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Fred. I'll be drawing obviously from my new book, and I in 40 minutes I'll be touching on different chapters that appear. So the first question is, why is promoting independence and self-sufficiency so crucial for the autism population? And I know that I'm speaking to the choir quite a bit at this point, but there's some statistics we have to take a look at. And if we could take a look at this at slide number 2.
There we go.
Thank you. So we know that over 50,000 Americans with autism are going to transition to adulthood every year. And this is when all the educational services under the IDEA statute come to a crashing end. It's often referred to as going off the cliff. And for parents, it's a rude awakening. So in order to make that transition, you need to have a certain amount of independence. The autism population is also hindered by rampant unemployment. And we're talking about at least 85% unemployment against a neurotypical rate, which is lately has been somewhere between 5% and 20%. So that's awful. But when you think about 85% unemployment, it's just unthinkable. So Congress, in one of the reauthorizations of the IDEA statute, said in reauthorizing, we really have had a problem with the IDEA statute because of low expectations. And so if Congress, a bipartisan Congress that enacted the IDEA statute can recognize that low expectations is a problem, we have to have higher expectations. And that we're really looking at an outcome kind of result, not just looking at learning on a one-to-one basis for each year. We're looking at what is the outcome going to look like at the time of the transition to adulthood. Promoting greater levels of independence obviously expands the available options that you might be able to choose from at adulthood. Even something like yesterday, when New York City closed the schools again, for the second time. The greater the independence, the more likely it is that you'll be able to educate your child effectively with remote teaching, and less so if you are not on the independence bandwagon. One of the other big issues is the fiscal issue. I mean, right now, our country is in a certain amount of fiscal trouble. We have when they did the first stimulus package back in March of 2020, Lamar Alexander proposed a scenario where Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, would have actually had the ability to call out sections of the IDEA statute that she didn't think should be complied with, and then ostensibly Congress would have redlined those out of the statute, and we would have been left with a stripped down version of IDEA or worse. Fortunately, although Secretary DeVos had the opportunity for 30 days to identify sections of IDEA that she didn't think should be complied with, she really didn't identify anything that was significant. So the disability community dodged a tremendous bullet at that point. So, and frankly, independence is essential because, well, let's face it, parents are not going to live forever. Woody Allen was right. None of us are going to get out of here alive. So I know I'm preaching to the choir on these reasons. Can I get to slide 3, please? So when I talk about, when I originally did this slide, imagine 50,000 Americans with autism transitioning to adulthood. It sounds like such a big number, but when you look at what's going on in the news today with 250,000 Americans dead from COVID-19, it's really it's sort of like, what's your issue? So, my issue is independence. People who are watching this today, their issue is autism. But if you're Joe Biden, you have a different issue. If you are Anthony Fauci, your issue is different. And Abraham Maslow was absolutely right. If you're a hammer, you tend to see the whole world as a nail. So depending on what your hammer is, it depends on what is of interest to you. So the bottom line of this is, how do we get our nation, how do we get our legislatures, and I'm talking about state legislatures as well as the national, how do we get them to focus on autism and recognize it for the important field that it is, so that they invest the money that's needed to be able to promote independence and self-sufficiency? And that's it. That's going to be a terrible problem. The IDEA statute was formed as a bipartisan effort. It was probably one of the last times that Congress worked effectively together. But I'm not sure in today's divisive climate whether we have the same kind of bipartisan availability that we had in the. God forbid we have to do a reauthorization of the IDEA statute in the next, in the next months. That would be awful. We really have to be careful about that, because we could lose these protections very, very, very quickly. If I could get slide number 4, please. Now, before the pandemic hit, back in 2017, there was a fantastic decision by the United States Supreme Court called Andrew F. And before Andrew F, we had the Rowley standard and other cases going back to about 1982, and they could never get the standard right as to what it really meant to offer a FAPE, the free and appropriate public education. What was the standard? How much educational benefit did they have to provide? So the Rowley case, this is the one back in 1982, said, well, because we've had situations where students with disabilities were excluded from public education, so long as there's access and there's some benefit, we're okay with that. So this some benefit standard was obviously not enough for the autism population, which needs a much higher standard. And so we kind of just were languishing with this some benefit standard, this access standard under Rowley, until we get to Andrew F. And Andrew F, all of a sudden, and it's amazing because it was a unanimous decision. Can you imagine today getting a unanimous decision from today's Supreme Court with what has happened in just since the Andrew F decision came down? So we're very lucky that Andrew F came down when it did. The court unanimously held and clarified the standard of care that school districts must apply. IEP goals must now be sufficiently ambitious, they have to be challenging, and they have to take the student's potential into account. This is the first time that the Supreme Court ever even used the word potential in the sense that it had to be considered. Amazing. So this new FAPE standard may now require school districts to employ foundational assessments or to provide parents with independent evaluations at school district expense, because otherwise, if you don't do your assessment and evaluation work, how would you ever know whether the standard was ambitious or challenging or took the student's potential into account? That could only occur by doing comprehensive evaluation. So I think that the takeaway from the Andrew F case is not only do we have these new standards, but as a practical matter, it now requires a more comprehensive approach to the evaluation process. If I could get the next slide number 5, please. So going along with the FAPE standard, with challenging and ambitious and so forth, is this idea that students should be in their least restrictive environment. I'm not suggesting that a student who needs special education services or who needs a residential placement should be in a least restrictive environment setting, but there are so many students who really really need to be in a less restrictive setting who are not. So the idea on this one is that no student should have to earn the right to go into a least restrictive environment setting, and that school districts should be following the preference of Congress for less restrictive settings, even if a student needs a one-to-one aid or other supports to be successful in that setting. We sometimes hear school districts will say, hey, if the student really needs a one-to-one aid, then that student should be in a more restrictive setting. Wrong. Congress says that we want the student to be in the less restrictive setting, even if it means additional supports and accommodations. And before moving a student from a less restrictive setting to a more restrictive setting, the school district is obligated to reasonably try everything that is available to try to sustain the student in their least restrictive environment. So we've had a lot of least restrictive environment cases over the years, and parents should, if they're on the fence, I think that the presumption should be that they should try to do everything to try to get into that least restrictive setting with appropriate supports. Could I have slide number 6, please? Now, if you're a parent or you're a teacher or you're an administrator, you know how difficult it is for the autism population to generalize skills. It's not enough to learn a skill at the table if that skill cannot be demonstrated again in a different setting or with a different individual or different teacher. But yet that is the problem. The school district will often report that they taught a skill to a student only to find out months later when they probe that the skill set has not really been learned at all. So generalization is a huge issue, and generalization is pretty much, I would say, almost universally recognized as essential to promoting independence and self-sufficiency. The problem here is that the federal courts have really, they've treated generalization as some kind of add-on or extra or some kind of optimization of a program when it's not. Generalization has to be thought about as a fundamental component of the educational process, and yet it's not. Now, where does this come into play in the court system? There was a case called Luke P. back in 2008 from the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And the judge who wrote that decision is none other than Justice Gorsuch, who now sits on the Supreme Court. He was applying that standard that I told you about, the some benefit standard, the access standard, which was a very low standard at the time, because this is pre-NJRF. And Justice Gorsuch said, well, if I'm applying the some benefit standard, and the school system doesn't have to do that much, they just have to give some benefit, I'm going to find out that generalization, even though the student in question in Luke P didn't generalize any of their skills, didn't learn anything, and had the same goals and objectives over and over, year after year, I'm going to find that was a defensible IEP, and the student is not going to prevail in the case. Well, that was an awful decision, and it was actually when Justice Gorsuch was questioned by Congress during his confirmation hearings, the Luke P case came up, and he said, well, at the time that was the standard, and NJRF is now the standard, of course, and so there may have been I might have decided it differently. So the question is now coming down is, what will the federal court system do now that we have the NJRF decision? Will the federal court system follow the Luke P type of rationale, the some benefit rationale, or will they recognize that generalization is essential to the production of greater levels of independence and self-sufficiency? And I think that parents have to be able to pull out the NJRF decision when they have their IEP meetings, to make sure that the IEP team is aware of the new standards, and parents should not. In the past, where parents were maybe reticent to raise the generalization issue, thinking that it was not going to be given, that would be given short shrift, parents should really push the generalization issue now and say that, hey, look, under NJRF, I think that when you look at the standard of being ambitious and challenging and taking my child's potential into account, that requires promoting generalization of skills. Because without generalization of skills, honestly, what does the student learn? It's just I wouldn't say a total waste of money, but it is illusory to think that you can have an appropriate education of a child with autism without promoting generalization. So I'm hoping that in the next decade, this will be the decade of generalization not being a dirty word with school districts around the country. If we can have slide 7, please. So, activities of daily living, or ADL goals, they've been in IEPs for many, many years. And you see that, Johnny's going to learn how to get dressed. Johnny's going to learn how to button his buttons. Johnny's going to learn how to go independently to the bathroom, hygiene skills, and so forth. But now, with the advent of COVID-19 and all that, it is essential that today's IEP contains specific ADL goals for safety protocols, when to wear a mask, sustaining mask usage, how to put on and take off a mask, how to maintain physical distance, hand washing, staying away from the water fountain, even how to go on or go get off the elevator, how to have lunch, coughing into your elbow, not shaking hands. All these things need to now be built into IEP goals and objectives for all students. And it's not just something that you learn at home. It must be in the IEP. And by the way, so far, every one of the things I've talked about so far are in the book, and there's 233 pages of all kinds of new stuff that's been introduced because of COVID-19. So the next slide, which is slide 8, which is when I put together these slides, I of course had no idea that New York City was going to close down the schools again yesterday, which is what they did. And they went again for the second time to remote instruction. Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say that this is a population, a very vulnerable population that struggles to learn even with one-to-one direct instruction, So the idea that they're now going to go to remote instruction is quite a diminution of service, and comes with all new kinds of expectations and anxieties. So I say on this slide, it's not about attendance, it's about attending. And that is a huge issue. How to get the student to sit in front of a computer screen for hours and attend is a real challenge. But what you're trying to do is trying to get the students' IEP goals and somehow condense them in such a way that it can be delivered through that portal. And that's very, very difficult. Your school should have a remote learning plan. If it doesn't, it should really have a very step-by-step plan that should then be individually tailored to your child. It can't be just a building-wide or a school-wide remote learning plan. A parent or whoever is doing this at home has to maintain a chronology and a detailed schedule of all sessions. And really the issue comes down to how is success being measured? How is the efficacy of the programming and teaching being measured? Because what if the student is not learning anything, which is a possibility? A parent may want to be making a record of this so that either during the remote instruction period or thereafter, they might be able to get additional hours of instruction from the school district, or possibly bringing in an impartial hearing to get additional hours. A parent who's doing or other caregiver who's doing remote instruction at home needs to be able to respond to a crisis. What happens if somebody becomes ill? Is the child going to be able to know how to open up their computer and have the incentive and wherewithal to put together the programming? No, this goes back to the issue about independence. The more independence that has been promoted in the child, the easier it would be to deal with something like remote instruction. So, you know, do parents think this is a wonderful mode of instruction? Of course not. Do the school districts think that it's wonderful? No, it's an emergency option. And so hopefully New York City and other municipalities who are doing remote instruction will get out of the remote instruction business as soon as they possibly can. Can I get slide number 9, please? I think you went to. Yes, that's it. Now, all this remote technology, the Zoom technology that we're using today, it's not all bad. And there are actually some new uses for this technology and it's a new benefit that it's really becoming much more widespread. So there are things that we can use this technology for to improve the situation, and it's already being improved. Many assessments that would require all kinds of appointments and so forth and scheduling can now be done on a remote basis. Not all of them, many of them cannot be done remotely, but assessments, many can be. So that's a whole area. Sharing of data, parent training and counseling, perfect area for using Zoom technology. Group speech sessions, social skill groups, team meetings, and probing to assess generalization. You know, all of these are areas that can use Zoom technology. Or even a student, let's say a student is learning, is trying to figure out if they're interested in a particular transition training. Maybe it's a culinary arts course. They might be able to sample that course remotely by Zoom, whereas they would have to be driven out to the site and make an appointment and all that. So Zoom technology is going to be here with us. Hopefully not so much for remote teaching, but for all these other options that can be accessed. Can I get slide 10, please? So parents have been asking for a long time, is the pandemic such that it can give rise to any due process claims? Because I feel that my child's education has really suffered as a result of that. Well, the simple answer is yes, it can give rise to claims, and those claims are yet, some of them are yet to evolve. The first thing is that your child is guaranteed safe access to an appropriate education. It's not just the FAPE, the appropriate education, that's guaranteed, but safe access is also guaranteed. And I'm talking about decisions such as Judge Weinstein's decision in the TK case, which is a bullying case from several years ago, where the judge said that students have the right to a safe education. So let's say that your school district your child is in school and they're not undertaking basic safety precautions. Then they're not making people wear masks. They're letting students be right next to each other and so forth. You might be able to bring a claim against the school district and possibly get a different placement as a result of the failure to adhere to basic safety protocols. If you have a demonstrable regression in your child's progress, again, by taking of data, you may have a situation where you might be able to go after the school district for what's called compensatory education, to try to get these additional services or the money so that you can pay for them yourself. Unfulfilled IEP mandates, this is a huge area. If your IEP says that your child's supposed to get 3 hours of speech a week and because of the pandemic they're getting nothing, you should carefully document how many hours your child is missing, and at the end of the process or at some convenient time, you may want to review those unfulfilled hours and figure out, is this a good time to be going for compensatory education relief? Just because there's a pandemic, it doesn't mean that the school district is off the hook. And parents, you should be vigilant in making sure that if your child's IEP mandates and requires certain services, that those services are delivered, even if they have to be delivered at some later date. Can I get slide 11, please? So I think I already answered this question in the prior slides, but basically the question comes down to, is the pandemic setting the stage for a flurry of compensatory education claims? So, and the answer is yes. I think that it's just unfortunate, but parents, there are going to be hundreds, if not thousands of parents who are going to be left with these claims. And the question comes down to is, when do you assert them? I would rather that parents didn't wait until the very end and collected all of their unfulfilled hours to make a stink of it with the school system. If you notice that that is a significant percentage of your child's services are not being fulfilled, raise the alarm as soon as possible, document it, write letters, you can write emails, whatever it is, but just make sure that there's a record of you complaining about that. And you're not going to get an hour by hour compensation in terms of service hours for services that are missed, but it'll be some reasonable representation of what your child did miss. Be very careful not to miss, however, the IDEA statute's 2-year statute of limitations. There's not an unlimited time frame to go after these unfulfilled service hours, and your child needs the service hours sooner than later, so you should not wait for that. If I could get slide, yes, thank you, slide 12. So the situations that are on this slide, basically, by having students with autism in inclusion with the neurotypical population, not hidden away in some kind of institutional setting, there's a cost to that. The cost is and this is the price that we have to pay for that opportunity. And I'm not suggesting that we should not pay the price. I think it's well worth it. But the situations that I've listed here are all situations that, these are not hypotheticals. These are actual situations that my firm has dealt with over the years. And some of them have come up more than once. Elopement situations where somebody just disappears from school. When Avante Oquendo disappeared from his school back in 2000, I think it was 14 or 2015, New York City thought, well, this is the last time it'll ever happen. This was an aberration. I think it happened 6 or 7 more times before they finally got control of this. Kids were just leaving the premises, and often to very dangerous endings. We had a student who didn't get on their bus, and as a result was wandering the streets of Yonkers in sub-freezing temperatures until 5 o'clock the next morning, was very lucky to be found alive. Disciplinary proceedings. Sometimes these things are, they're almost borderline comical. For example, plagiarism. I'm going to here to tell you that students with autism have great difficulty understanding the difference between research and plagiarism. So they don't often cite to their sources, and they can get into terrible problems with administrators who have very strict plagiarism rules. Or cheating on tests. We've had situations where a student would pull out a calculator or do something very overt and get caught cheating, not trying to even conceal the cheating. So this is another area. Bullying is a huge area. We have numerous phone calls every year with the bullying issue, and I think school districts today are much more attuned to bullying and what it constitutes and what to do with bystanders and how to basically disempower the bully and how to empower the victims and their bystanders so that it doesn't occur. I think bullying is an area that is tremendously improved over the last 5 or 6 years. Before then, it was considered a rite of passage. Sexual abuse. Unfortunately, students with autism are about 4 times more likely to be sexually abused, and it can happen in school. We had a situation in New Haven several years ago where a paraprofessional was accused of sexually abusing a student, and a jury in New Haven found that in fact there was sexual abuse. So it does happen, and probably more often than it needs to. Active shooter lockdown drills. Students have to be prepared for these drills because when the lockdowns occur, we had a situation where a student really believed that the that there was in fact an active shooter in their building and went into a closet and wouldn't come out. And when the aide came to get the student out, was getting angry with the student for not coming out of the closet, and actually yanked the student out so hard that they broke the student's ankle. So these things need to be the product of training. Confrontations with police is another, unfortunately, a growing area. And there's confrontations with police occur because, let's face it, police, they want answers to questions. What's your name? What are you doing here? Show me some ID. And in barking or shouting out questions, they expect quick answers. And students with autism often, particularly if they're nonverbal, don't have answers. And it may appear to the police officer that they're being given disrespect. And this is how these confrontations can escalate very quickly. We had a situation where a student, an African-American student living in Virginia, was waiting outside of a public library because that's what they like to do. They like to go in the library and read books, imagine. And somebody called in and said, I think there's a black man with a gun waiting outside the lobby. Well, you can imagine what happened. Police officer shows up, asks a number of questions. The student did not respond quickly enough. Next thing you know, there's a scuffle to the ground. There's a wrestling match going on between the student and the police officer. And tragically, the police officer was injured for life and was partially paralyzed from this encounter. The student was then arrested, went to jail for several years. I was involved in the effort to get this person released to a therapeutic setting. We had to get Bob Wright and Suzanne Wright from Autism Speaks involved. We wrote to Governor Terry McAuliffe, who was then the governor of the state of Virginia, and he commuted the sentence, but it was a nightmare. And if we didn't get that student out of the regular jail, there's no question he would have died. So, and my book highlights not only that situation, but another situation we had when one of our first cases in Alaska, where a student going just to get his mail and in front of his own house was confronted by a police officer who was new to the force. And the next thing you know, he was on the ground getting pepper sprayed. So, training is important. Not only training of the student as to how to act in these confrontations, but training obviously the police force to be able to recognize the signals of when you're dealing with somebody with autism or with somebody who has a developmental disability. I have another bullet here: discrimination at the. If you can go back, yeah, we're back. That's the slide. Discrimination at the local town pool. Again, this is often a training issue, but we get several calls a year from parents who are saying my child is being discriminated against at some local town function. Employment discrimination. Sometimes the bullying that you see in school winds up spilling over into the employment situation when somebody is fortunate enough to get a job. It's really hard to get that job, but it can be really easy to lose that job. Very, very easy to lose that job. I won't tell you it would take too long to tell the story of one of our employment discrimination cases, but basically that this person's coworkers decided that they didn't want this individual working with them anymore. And they came up with a scheme to get them fired. And we fortunately were able to, we had a trial and we were able to prove that because the coworkers were coming up with so many varying different stories that they couldn't all be true. So the employee kept his position, and this person is still working in the same position years later, and is now a union rep. So we're very proud that we were able to keep him in employment. But there's no end to the non-financial costs of inclusion. It's a price that we have to pay, and these scenarios are all profiled in my book. If we could go to slide 13, please. So while the student is in the educational system under IDEA, they have all these educational mandates. They're entitled to a free and appropriate public education. They're entitled to least restrictive environment. They're entitled to accommodations, and they are entitled to transition, support, and training. And transition and support and training is all about getting ready for the transition to adulthood, when the student will go off the cliff, so to speak, and leave the educational world for the world of adulthood. And that's a very scary time for most families, because they're so used to the mandates of IDEA, and they're not used to losing those mandates. So every state has a different age when transition really is triggered in earnest, when they really have to start putting together services and supports and training and so forth. So if you're in the state of Connecticut, it's 14. Connecticut should be rather proud of the fact that the transition starts at 14, because the national standard doesn't start until 16. New York, for example, starts at 15. So your state, you have to look at your individual state to see when your transition rights really kick in. But don't be thinking, if you're a parent, oh, transition is going to be graduation. It can wait. It can't wait. Because once you go off the cliff and you lose those services, you're going to wish that you had them. So it's important that parents register with their state agencies early on. They can register even before ages 14, 15, or 16, so that they're ready to go. You want to be ready to go. And the objective is that when you graduate, and maybe your child will graduate at 18, maybe you won't want them to graduate until they're 21, and some states even go beyond 21. But the key here is that you must work with the transition agencies to make sure that when your child graduates, that they graduate to something, and that's essential. So I think at this point, we can have slide, yeah. So the book is available on Amazon or difflearn.com, and it contains a lot more information than I just obviously touched upon in 40 or 45 minutes. But if this is an appropriate time, we're very happy to take questions. The moderator, I think, is going to select questions of general interest.
So the first question we have is, we have provided some of our students with wallet size information stating I have autism and what this may mean. We teach our students to show this to the police and to other community persons. Oh, this isn't really a question, just a suggestion. I don't know if you want to touch more on that, Gary.
Yeah. I'm very nervous about, I'm not nervous about identification bracelets, because the police officer can see those without there being any kind of threatening anything. But sometimes when somebody goes reaching in their pocket for the card, the police officer mistakes the motion of going into the pocket as some kind of threatening move that might produce a gun or a knife or some other weapon. So, parents often think, oh, if I just have them yank out the card, that's a good thing. But until they get the card out, it's a precarious moment, because the police officer may react thinking that their life is in danger. That's a real possibility that parents have to be concerned about if they arm their child with some kind of a card that has to be yanked out of a pocket.
And the poster has commented that they teach and role play and model what to do for safety.
Well, that's important. Role play and modeling is very important. But you can imagine if you're the police officer and somebody is reaching into their jacket to get something, you don't know what they're pulling out. The person pulling out the card knows that they're just going for a card, but the police officer is thinking they're going in their pocket for something, and I don't know what it is. So, and police officers have told me that is a concern, this idea with the cards. So it comes with its own risk, unfortunately.
Does anybody else have a question they want to enter into the chat? So we have one. I've partnered with the local PD to demystify the look, uniform activity of police officers, and I have them come to school.
Oh yeah, I think it's great when you can get local law enforcement or first responders, whether they're fire department or police department, to come to school not only demystify, but also to make the students feel comfortable knowing that they should be able to trust a first responder. That is a great thing to do. And it's another thing that some parents will do is if they don't have these first responders coming to school, particularly if you're living in a small town, it might be a good idea to actually drop by the local precinct with your student, with your child, and introduce them to some of the police officers so that they will be able to, maybe trust someone in the uniform a little easier. That's often a good idea.
The next question, can you talk about the ways schools have partnered with parents during this time?
During what time?
COVID.
Well, I think teachers, the problem that we have with autism in terms of education are only going to be solved through the public education system. I'm a great believer in public education. I think that the private schools have had to be the pioneers, though, to be able to bring the technologies to forward that are helping the students learn. But I think that the parents get trained by teachers who are, I think that there's parent training and counseling is a big issue. I think that when parents get enlisted in the educational process, there's usually a better outcome than if parents just leave everything to the teacher. It can't be done that way. When school systems send home, let's say, a educational technology, assistive technology, and train parents in assistive technology, that's very helpful. When they provide opportunities for social skill groups, or speech sessions, I think that there's no end to the amount of collaboration, or just even calling in the parent for a meeting. And I mentioned before about the Zoom technology. Parents don't have to take off time from work necessarily to go down to the school to meet with the teacher. You have the Zoom technology. You could do it at any time theoretically. So I always think it's best when the school system is acting in a collaborative manner with the parent, and parents should expect collaboration and vice versa. And it's the only way that you can address it is in some kind of comprehensive approach like that.
Does anybody else have a question?
Great talk, Ari.
Great to be here, Fred. Thank you for having me.
One thing that's interesting in Connecticut, we've recently started, I usually have one right in front of me, I could show you. The Department of Motor Vehicles now gives people the option of having, if they have autism and they've got a driver's license, there's something called a blue envelope. There's an equivalent thing for people who are deaf. It's a different color, but it's put out, but you have to get it from the DMV. But you keep your materials in it, but you hand that to the officer if he asks you for your registration, blah, blah, blah. But it says, and they're all supposed to know what a blue envelope means. It's a person with autism. And it says it on the envelope itself. I don't know of other states, but, and I don't know what the success rate is. I don't know how people have used it, but it's an interesting thought. I would have a little bit of a worry that, the person with autism would so quickly go to the glove compartment to get the blue envelope. It could be mistaken, but they need to be told to wait until the police officer asks. But I didn't know if you'd heard of that. It's just started this year.
I think it's actually a great initiative because it really, you have to produce your license anyhow. So
Yeah.
that's considered non-threatening by the police officer. They ask you for your license. So you're pulling out something which they've asked you to do. So whatever can signify on that piece of paper that there's some special situation, I think that it'll decrease the chances for a confrontation. That's a good one.
Good. Any other questions, comments? This was a great talk, a very important topic, especially these days, because COVID has taken its toll on all of us, especially those of us with special needs in our population, as parents and teachers alike know.
Yeah, we don't want to be in a situation where COVID gets taken care of over the next 6 months to a year, principally, and that our children are a year behind because
Right.
we failed to take action to preserve their entitlements.
Any other questions, Eileen?
We just had a comment. Somebody commented that they think the blue envelope system should be put out through public service messaging. I think that's a great suggestion.
I agree.
It is. We can see if we can contact. We are trying to look at efforts to educate police departments. We actually have a program for training first responders in Connecticut. We're actually now having maybe our third or fourth session. First responders turn out not to be the police. First responders is ambulance, EMT, firemen, and we're looking into sort of the police training issues, which turn out to be, it's a different system and it's complicated. We're looking at it. Los Angeles apparently has a very good track record of training police, not only for autism, but for a range of problems, mental health issues, other kinds of problems. And we're looking at that and see what they do as kind of a model. But you're absolutely right to say that the police are a big worry.
Right. And many of the private schools that we've worked with, including, for example, in Manhattan, the Manhattan Children's Center in New York City, have done programs with the local police department to basically desensitize the students to the presence of police officers, and also to obviously to educate the police staff themselves.
Yep. Anything else, Eileen?
No, I just have a quick question. Beth, you commented that Amy Davies Lackey has done that in New York City. Were you referring to the police? And I'm going to unmute you. The police training? Oh, I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay.
She's actually at the school that Gary just mentioned at MCC.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
with their older children. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Good. Thank you. That was good information to have.
Thank you. Thanks
Great call,
everybody for
Gary.
attending. This is great. Gary, thank you very much for presenting.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Stay safe. And here's the slide for our next talk in the series. And this is puppets, if anybody is interested, and please tell people about it. Gary, thank you so much. We enjoyed having you this morning. And we'll get you the slide, we'll get you a copy of this and you can okay it and we'll be done. Thank you.
Be safe, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you, Gary. This was great.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Fred.